The T cells can come back in large numbers, like an army, with the tools that are needed to cause the cancer cells to die. It's exciting and challenging to be first. For this particular technology, we're a little bit ahead of where it is on the human side. We'll do an exciting commercial launch, switch over from our experimental label to a license.
Welcome to Dog Cancer Answers, where we help you help your dog with cancer.
Why do our dogs still face old school treatments for cancer? Today, we're exploring an innovative immunotherapy with Tammie Wahaus from ELIAS Animal Health. It's for dogs with osteosarcoma, and it has just cleared a major milestone on the path to market. The journey towards market acceptance is not straightforward. We'll discuss with her the company's novel approach and how it differs from traditional methods. Now, I need to flag something right up front. We're discussing something called a biologic technology, which is a treatment made from living cells, and it's not a conventional drug. This means that ELIAS is navigating a different regulatory landscape. This immunotherapies regulation is under the purview of the USDA rather than the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The USDA route can be quicker, and potentially that streamlines the path to bringing this personalized treatment to our dogs sooner. ELIAS's method is compelling. They start by making a vaccine derived from the dog's own tumor. After a series of vaccinations, the dog's own immune system knows how to fight that tumor. However, it is not strong enough to actually beat the cancer. So that is when ELIAS takes the naive immune cells back to their facilities and whips them up into a veritable army of angry T cells. And now that army of angry T cells becomes an immunotherapy infusion. This personalized cancer treatment represents a hopeful shift towards targeted cancer therapies. Will it prove a safe and effective alternative to chemotherapies for dogs with osteosarcoma? ELIAS hopes so, and not just for osteosarcoma, but maybe for other cancers as well. CEO Tammie Wahaus first came to Dog Cancer Answers back in 2022. Today, we are continuing that with a new conversation and an update. We'll cover the results of the clinical trials, the successes and the obstacles encountered, and what is next for this pioneering treatment as it proceeds to full market approval. Tammie Wahaus, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back on the podcast and share updates from ELIAS.
Yes, we had you back in early 2022, so a bit has changed. I know you got some news from the U.S. Department of Agriculture recently that helps advance what you're doing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when we last spoke, I think we were wrapping up our clinical trial, our pivotal study for bone cancer in dogs. Most recently, in January, we received our notification from the USDA that they found our study results acceptable for purposes of moving forward in the licensure process. So that's been the hill we've been climbing since we launched this company, and it's exciting to finally be here. Still a lot of work ahead of us as we work, with working on the commercialization plan for how we will launch the product commercially. In the meantime, it will continue to be available under the experimental label that we've been operating under for the last several years. But we're at the stage with the regulatory body that we're working on what information will the labels contain, and all of that takes a little bit of time. It'll be later in 2024 when we get the official license and switch over to a licensed product. The product itself won't change. It'll just be a different label.
It'll just be a different label because they determine that it has, I think, quote unquote, reasonable expectancy or efficacy. It's reasonable to expect that there might be efficacy in this.
Yeah,
guarded language that all these regulatory bodies use, right?
That's right. And that's even an evolutionary process. The autologous therapies and specifically the autologous cell therapy that we're using is, first in the category. So a lot of things that are being learned by us, by the regulator, as everyone kind of steps through this process. And so for the autologous products, their label will say, that it has demonstrated a reasonable expectation of efficacy. There's also demonstrated an acceptable safety profile. It'll say what we found in the study, what was the efficacy, and what's the safety profile look like, what things, could you expect. It's exciting and challenging to be first. Because there's a lot of unknowns.
Because you are first. Let's talk a little bit about that for those who might not have heard our last podcast from a couple of years ago, because they weren't focusing on dog cancer at that point because, well, it just wasn't relevant in their lives. Do the quick survey overview of what this technology is that you're using.
From a scientific perspective, it's called an adoptive cell therapy. We use the word autologous, and I can explain that very simply by saying autologous means that you have taken cells from one individual, you've processed them, and you're giving them back to that same individual. So, ours is a personalized medicine in the sense that we're collecting the tumor tissue from the surgeons so that we can turn those into a vaccine that is used to inform the immune system what the cancer looks like. And following the vaccine series, we're going to end up with T cells, which are the immune cells in the body that now recognize what the cancer looks like. Unfortunately, they're not strong enough yet to really fight the cancer. So we're going to then collect those primed immune cells and process them in our lab, in our manufacturing facility, into killer T cells. So you're going to give us prime T cells after you get the vaccinations, and then we're going to give you back killer T cells that are now activated and expanded in number. There's a lot of them, and they're really mad about that cancer. And
so that's really the way to describe the difference between a prime T cell and a killer T cell.
Yeah. And it is an actual technical term, killer T cells.
But it's one of those rare times where the term actually conveys to everyone, even a layperson.
Yeah, and their job, and again, to maybe explain it in a non-scientific way, the immune cells, these T cells that we all have, their job in the body is to constantly surveil and look for things that don't belong here. So their job is to, find bacteria, kill it, find viruses, kill it, find cancer. Would like to kill it, but unfortunately cancer's a mutation of yourself, and the immune cells, the T cells, have a mechanism. Unless you have autoimmune disease,
they don't want to kill them.
They don't want to kill themselves, right? They don't want to kill the host. They want to just keep looking for things that don't belong here. So cancer has a whole lot of mechanisms that enable it to hide from the T cells. And so it takes this ex vivo, outside the body activation so that the T cells can come back in large numbers, like an army, with the tools that are needed to cause the cancer cells to die. Mm-hmm. Now, the tools that they have is essentially, they just go around the body and probe cells that they come across. And when they find a cell that has this abnormality, then they essentially, poke a hole, cause it to die.
Yeah.
and they do it with.
You get out of here.
Yeah, they do it through some proteins that are called cytokines, which is what aids in the killing of the cancer cells.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of the study that the USDA said had a reasonable expectation of seeing some efficacy, you had 100 dogs in it?
Yeah, we had approximately 100 dogs. We screened about 120. And, there's always in a clinical trial some dogs who don't qualify. Right. So we had about 100 dogs, and they were randomized 1-to-1, which means when they came into the study, if they met all the criteria for participation in the study, they would get randomly assigned to either our treatment arm or the control arm. And in this particular case, the control arm was what is commonly used today to treat canine osteosarcoma, which is a form of chemotherapy called Carboplatin.
Right.
So all dogs received some form of therapy, either what is commercially available today and has been for the last standard of care for the last 40 years, or the experimental therapy, which was our treatment.
And the results in that early trial?
The results from the pivotal study where the USDA found that it had a reasonable expectation of efficacy, we were able to demonstrate that a certain percentage of dogs were able to derive a benefit from our therapy. And keep in mind that these dogs were treated with our therapy instead of chemo and not in addition to chemo. So what we were hoping to prove is that our therapy is an appropriate alternative to chemotherapy. Because you have a lot of pet owners out there that either won't choose chemotherapy for their dog or for a variety of reasons can't choose.
So reading between the lines in terms of the efficacy relative to the traditional carboplatin, it was as good, not quite as good?
Yeah, so I would say we're not quite as good as the carboplatin in our study. I will say that the carboplatin results in our study outperformed any other carboplatin study ever performed.
Yeah.
So, from our
unfortunately,
perspective,
for the case,
right, right.
The way science works,
exactly. Yeah, we had to run the study during the pandemic. We had, for whatever reason, the carboplatin treatment arm just magnificently outperformed. Normally, one would expect a median survival time of, with carboplatin, all the historical studies say somewhere between 270 days, 320 days. Our carboplatin arm was way beyond 320 days. But if you compare ours to, what we have seen historically and what people normally expect carboplatin to do, we were right in there with, what we've historically seen carboplatin to do. So disappointing to, have that happen in the study. Also disappointing that we had to run the study during the pandemic. So, but, despite the odds, we're pleased to be able to say that this continues to be a treatment option that is viable, and we're monitoring safety all the time, right? But we had very few adverse events. In that trial, we had no serious adverse events that were triggered by the treatment. I mean, these dogs have cancer and bad things happen to dogs with cancer. But in that trial, we saw no serious adverse events that were treatment related or treatment emergent would be a different way to say it. So we were very pleased that the safety profile in the big study was very consistent with the safety profile in the first preliminary study. We do know that with cell therapies, especially adoptive T-cell therapies, that you can have a serious adverse event that's called cytokine release syndrome. So anybody who's out there like Googling, what are the side effects from CAR Ts or side effects from, on the humans, they are seeing the cytokine release syndrome. And so we watch for that and we educate the veterinarians based on everything we've seen. What should you be watching for that will suggest to you that this might be happening in this particular dog? Because everyone's immune system is different. They're going to react differently. We fortunately did not see it in the big study, but so
none of the 100 dogs or 50 or whatever was
none of the 50 dogs had that. Yeah. But we don't want to be complacent, right?
Because you had seen some of it in the prior study.
We saw one case of it in the prior study. We've seen a few potential cases of it in like other tumor types. And so we want to make sure everybody's got their eyes wide open and they know what to watch for and when it's happening, how to treat it quickly so that you can, because you can get it, you can reverse it, but you have to be paying attention. So, in all of our training, we make sure that everyone knows that this is a possibility. We don't see it very often, but, until you do thousands and thousands and thousands of dogs, you can't say it's rare.
Right. And the vets you're working with, are they all oncologists?
Right now, we are working primarily with veterinarians who specialize in oncology.
But not necessarily boarded oncologists, but folks who specialize.
Yeah, because the board-certified oncology certification, you still have a lot of very experienced oncology specialists that were oncology specialists before that certification was a thing. So, they tend to be internal medicine, board-certified internal medicine. But for the T-cell infusion, we want the T-cell infusions done in a hospital where there is emergency care or overnight care, because if a dog does have an issue, we don't want them to have to be transported somewhere to spend the night. We want them to be in a hospital that has the capabilities to handle it. That won't always be the case, but as we add, dogs, as we get to thousands and thousands of dogs, and we know maybe there's a profile of dog that we can say, if the dog has this profile, then he should be treated in a facility with emergency care or overnight.
And this is at the stage where you introduce the killer T cells, which is a longer process. It's not just an injection.
Yeah, it's actually just a 30-minute infusion.
Okay.
Yeah, but, anytime you're infusing anything into the blood stream, they could have just a simple infusion reaction that isn't a cytokine release syndrome, but they're having an infusion reaction. Again, we didn't see it in the big study. We saw it very infrequently among, all of the other dogs we've treated. But again, we don't want to be complacent, and so we're right now going to continue to work with the hospitals that have the overnight care capabilities.
Let's pause here and acknowledge you. If you're watching this, your dog may have cancer and you are searching for solid information on new treatments. You're one of the compassionate and smart dog lovers that we love to help at dogcancer.com. Dogcancer.com is your trusted ally in navigating your dog's cancer journey. With our expert, vetted, and easy to understand resources, you get better information today, so you have no regrets tomorrow. Providing accurate and comprehensive medical information is our number one priority. But beyond that, we offer hope. Our team is amazing. It includes dozens of veterinarians and veterinary oncologists and technicians and PhD cancer researchers and science writers. That brain trust that we have all research, write, and perform rigorous medical review on every single resource at dogcancer.com. All of them, all of us, love dogs as much as you do. And we really understand on an emotional level what you are going through. At a recent meeting, a veterinarian colleague, team member, said something like, telling clients, quote, "There's nothing that we can do is just not cutting it anymore." Everyone on our team agrees with that sentiment. Don't wait to get the support and information that you need. Visit dogcancer.com today and join a community that understands and cares. And now, let's continue our hopeful heart-to-heart with Tammie Wahaus about an experimental immunotherapy for dogs. Right now, you're only focusing on osteosarcoma, right?
That was our primary target, yes. And so assuming everything stays on track, we would be the first cancer therapeutic approved for bone cancer in dogs. One of the unique features of our product is that because we're leveraging the tumor cells and leveraging the immune system, there's very good possibilities for this product to work in other cancer types. We had to stay focused on one cancer type because that's how you have to present your material for regulatory approval. As we're working on what our next steps are, we will continue to pay attention to lymphoma and see if we can figure out how to crack that nut.
Would that be the next one that you do after osteosarcoma?
So the very next trial that we're going to do is to try to work in metastatic osteosarcoma. Because our first trial was done in dogs where they were not metastatic at diagnosis. So that was one of the criteria.
Meaning it was discrete. It wasn't metastasizing around the body.
It wasn't visibly metastasized.
Right.
But with osteosarcoma, what they know and what history tells us is that it most likely has metastasized. It's just micrometastases and we can't see them yet on radiographs. But that was the criteria. If you had full-on lung mets that could be detected with radiographs, then you were not eligible for that trial because you were too much different. And, in order to get that reasonable expectation of efficacy, you've got to have a patient population that is sufficiently similar in stage of disease that you can reach a conclusion on, does it work in this population of dogs? So now what we're going to be doing is looking at that population of dogs that have metastatic disease. So they've got lung mets. So it'll be a small study enrolling at least 10 dogs where we're putting our T-cell therapy in combination with a checkpoint inhibitor. So the hypothesis is, what if you put 2 immunotherapies in, one working this way?
Contemporaneously.
Yes, or integrated in some way, not necessarily on the same day. But what if we attack the metastatic disease with a checkpoint inhibitor while we're bringing the adoptive cell therapy on board and have that integrated? Can the one immunotherapy slow that metastatic disease down long enough for the T-cell therapy to fully ramp up the immune system?
So while you're looking at, potentially different combinations of treatments using 2 different immunotherapies, had you looked at, using this in conjunction with, say, Carboplatin? So like you would be doing both at the same time?
Yeah,
higher efficacy.
Yeah, so we are working with a number of veterinary oncologists who believe very strongly that 1 or 2 doses of carboplatin right up front might provide a boost to the T-cell therapy as well. So we actually are writing up kind of a blog, I guess, that we'll make available to the veterinary oncologists to kind of pull together what we have seen as various people are doing this. Are they doing 1 dose? Are they doing 2 doses? And we're actually following dogs that are out, what we call our non-clinical trial dogs. So these are the dogs that, weren't in the clinical trial, but they were on the treatment through the experimental label, and we're following those dogs as best we can so that we can evaluate, does that make sense?
And then that would be using the carbo. But some oncologists are doing that. They're
some oncologists are doing that right now.
The 40-year-old carboplatin and then throwing immunotherapy on top of it.
We actually, if you ask us, we would say we would not suggest that you do all 4 doses of carboplatin. Because by that time you maybe have changed so many things that you aren't helping, and during that time you're damaging the immune system with the chemotherapy. So I think what they're really looking for is can we use the chemotherapy in 1 or 2 doses,
use less of it,
but use less of it, and then bring on the adoptive cell therapy, which, has an attractive safety profile and has demonstrated, a reasonable expectation of efficacy. we want to continue to look at, just like, other drug developers, you have a population of patients who respond really well, and you have a population of patients that respond okay. And then you've got this third population, right, that didn't respond at all. And so the next question that you want to answer is, can we find out anything about the population that did well? What's unique about them compared to the ones who didn't do well? Are they breeds? Do they have some biomarkers? So that's some of the work that, we'll be taking on in the coming months and years, is trying to isolate what are the predictive factors for which dog, because if you are the dog who is going to do great on the immunotherapy, on the T-cell therapy without carboplatin, let's don't have him take carboplatin. But if you're in that middle group where, man, if you'd had a dose of carboplatin, you would have been a great responder, then you want that dose of carboplatin. So there's a good amount of analysis that can be done, as we continue to work with the veterinary oncology community and treat patients to try to understand, are there any predictive factors that will help the oncologist make a treatment recommendation that is best suited for that particular patient.
How far ahead or behind, or are you just on par with immunotherapy in humans?
So the T-cell therapy that we're utilizing is also being advanced use in humans, and they're just launching their phase 2B registration trial. So we're going to beat them.
And that's done under FDA. And we should maybe make this very clear. So the reason that you're able to do this through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as opposed to the Food and Drug Administration Center for Veterinary Medicine, is?
The FDA has two divisions, a drug division and a biologics division. Mm-hmm. But within this, and for humans, the Center for Veterinary Medicine is drugs. And the USDA has biologics. They have the Center for Veterinary Biologics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so there's a whole decision tree on what is your product and which regulatory body has jurisdiction over that. So, yeah. It's
So they decided that.
Yeah, when we asked, they came back and said, this is a USDA Center for Veterinary Medicine product.
Okay. So
but,
is
for the humans,
immunotherapy not covered on the FDA side in the veterinary biologics part of FDA?
It's not about the whether it's an immunotherapy, because an immunotherapy is a technology that acts on the immune system. It's more about, is it a biologic? Is the underlying product a biologic? Or is it...
define a biologic.
So it's made of living cells.
Okay.
Whereas, is it a drug, which is, you look at the periodic table, right? And it has these molecules and those molecules. And so it's much more about how is the product manufactured and what is the essence of the product, and not as much about how does it deliver, how does it act.
So, but in terms of this search for immunotherapy in general for cancer, and we'll talk from a One Health perspective for a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Which I think you guys obviously are looking at the long game, right? You're obviously looking that if this can work in dogs, this can be transferred to people.
Yeah.
So in terms of the discussions about immunotherapy in the human space, you guys are a little bit ahead or behind, or how do you guys
with this
is it all how do you look at it in this giant context of understanding how we're trying to get a hold of cancer through this very innovative approach?
Yeah. So for this particular technology, we're a little bit ahead of where it is on the human side, because we've completed our pivotal study, our registration study, and are on the pathway to licensure. and they're just starting theirs. So from a bigger picture of immunotherapy, it really depends on the product and whether or not the product started in animals and moved to humans, or it started in humans and is being translated to animals. So you can find examples of ones where, it's fully approved in humans and has been for years and is only now coming to the companion animal side. So it's really all over the board. We're fortunate to be involved in the One Health space where, that our target patients for right now, which are dogs, do have enough similarities genetically to humans that we can look at what good things and bad things are happening in cancer product development on the human side and translate that to how do we interpret that for dogs. But we also, as a collaborator with the human health companies that we're working with, for example, we've in-licensed another immunotherapy that is called an oncolytic virotherapy. And right now, that human product is further along than where we are in dogs. They're already in their phase 3 trial, and we haven't even started. So it's really just product by product where you are. But we're really excited about, we've stayed laser focused on getting the T-cell therapy through this process and toward licensure. And we're very excited about being able to then get laser focused from an R&D perspective on bringing this oncolytic virotherapy forward because, that has the capability. So back to the combination of therapies, we would be able to combine this oncolytic virotherapy with our T-cell therapy and boost the number of responders. That
across the board, it would in theory improve the result that you would see from
either product alone.
Right. Synergies there.
Yes, absolutely. We're able to work across multiple cancer types, and we plan to. That product can work with our therapy, can work across multiple cancer types, can work with other therapies, and is, fairly easy to administer. The unique feature of that one is, as compared to the other ones that are out there, is its safety profile enables you to dose it intravenously. And most of those oncolytic virotherapies have a safety profile that limits you to only being able to administer it directly into the tumor or into the peritoneal cavity, but not into the bloodstream. Why is that important? Well,
I was going to say, that was my question. And why do you prefer the IV approach?
Because if you've got a dog with metastatic disease, you don't want to have to, you could dose this in the bloodstream, and the bloodstream will carry it to the metastatic sites instead of you having to administer it into all of the sites. Sometimes dogs have, inoperable tumors. So you don't want to have to try to figure out how am I going to get this into the tumor if I can't even, surgically remove it. And dogs are small, right? Right?
Yeah.
Being able to dose it intravenously is really good. Particularly for the canine population.
So as you look to the future, you're waiting for the USDA to do the label and then make it commercially available.
Yep. And then we'll do a exciting commercial launch, switch over from our experimental label to a license product.
When do you expect that?
It'll be later in 24.
Okay. And then contemporaneous with that, you, as the CEO, you're raising an A round of $10 million.
We're a $10 million Series A to fund the commercial launch as well as fund the clinical development plans for the oncolytic virotherapy as well as other, pilot studies that we'll be doing to expand the application of this T-cell therapy into other cancer types.
So we are going to continue to track your progress because this is fascinating, and we are, clearly there's a lot that you've already done, but there's a lot more to be done towards using this as a readily available tool for dogs with osteosarcoma, and then hopefully lymphoma and everything else.
Yeah.
So Tammie, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you for taking the time.
That's all for today's episode of Dog Cancer Answers. Please subscribe, ring the bell icon, do all those things so that other dog lovers get the signal that this is a channel worth watching. I'm James Jacobson on behalf of all of us here at Dog Podcast Network and dogcancer.com. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for listening to Dog Cancer Answers. If you'd like to connect, please visit our website at dogcancer.com or call our listener line at 808-868-3200. And here's a friendly reminder that you probably already know. This podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It's not meant to take the place of the advice you receive from your dog's veterinarian. Only veterinarians who examine your dog can give you veterinary advice or diagnose your dog's medical condition. Your reliance on the information you hear on this podcast is solely at your own risk. If your dog has a specific health problem, contact your veterinarian. Also, please keep in mind that veterinary information can change rapidly. Therefore, some information may be out of date. Dog Cancer Answers is a presentation of Maui Media in association with Dog Podcast Network.